All right, let's get really granular here and talk about the metabolic therapy. So, if somebody were to have a brain tumor, we'll use the glioblastoma like you mentioned earlier. We know glutamine and eliminating that, plus eliminating glucose is part of the treatment. Let's talk really again on a granular level what that looks like. How does somebody begin to do that through diet and drugs?
Well, yeah, the first thing. Now, the GBM, it's a call on the surgeon. They have to make a decision because some GBM, if it's not operated on immediately, it could herniate and kill that patient very, very quickly. So everything is a judgment call on the part of the surgeon. A surgeon has to do MRI, a variety of different scans to evaluate where that tumor is, the size of it, if it's impacting. Not all the time, but many times you have a watchful waiting period before you have to have the tumor removed surgically. We're not against, you got to, there's thousands of articles, I wouldn't say thousands, hundreds of articles in the scientific literature showing that the more I can debulk, get rid of it, the longer the patient will survive. No question about that. The issue, of course, is that if you have a watchful waiting period, this is an angry mass. And I'm not talking, I could be talking about liver cancer. I could be talking about bladder, colon, lung. They all have a lot of inflammation in the microenvironment. A lot of it's kind of bloody and angry, inflamed, and all this kind of stuff. You want to reduce local inflammation as best you can so that when you do the surgical debulking, you have more sharp edges around that tumor, and that when you do the debulking, you're going to get a lot more of the tumor than if you go after this tumor like a bull in a china shop, because you're going to create a mess. And that mess is going to elicit these tumor cells to invade and disseminate through the brain. So you really want to get as many tumor cells back into the central mass as possible. And you can do that by water-only fasting, extremely restricted ketogenic diets. You can get the inflammation in that to be less than it is. You make the mass less angry, less inflamed. Surgeon comes in, debulks. Already that patient will have an advantage to survive better, just because the surgeon was able to take more. How do I know that? Because we did the experiments here in the lab. We calculated all the angiogenesis, the bad blood vessels, the inflammation. We measured all the biomarkers and biochemical readouts for these things, and we can see it. The demarcation comes really sharp. Inflammation goes down. Angiogenesis goes down, which is abnormal blood vessel development. So you have all of the markers, and some of the tumor cells start to die. So all of this is really favorable therapeutic response if you have a watchful waiting period. So then the surgeon takes it out. And then after the surgeon would take it out, you would then transition back onto metabolic therapy. And there's a number of different drugs that we can use to facilitate calorie-restricted ketogenic diets, water-only fasting. These drugs are designed to specifically target the glucose and glutamine pathways in those tumor cells while not harming any of the normal cells of the body. So you don't have nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, hair loss, all this crazy stuff. You know, you're going specifically at the heart of what those tumor cells need to survive. And then you hope for the best. And we're not like our one patient, Pablo Kelly, who has a website, he talks about his survival over 8 years now. His tumor is not cured. It continues to grow, but it was made indolent. So every 3 or 4 years, he has a debulking surgery and goes back about his life. So I think a lot of people think we should cure cancer. Of course, everybody would like to cure cancer. But the second best thing is learning to live with it. If you had a terminal cancer and you're not terminal, you might be at some point, but you're outliving by long periods what you would have been expected to live. What's wrong with that? So, in other words, can you have effective management with maintaining a high quality of life? And maybe you eventually will die from this tumor, but you won't die in the time frame that 98% of the people are dying, and you're going to live a lot longer. So the idea is this is a very new strategy for managing cancer. Is it perfected? No. Do we understand the problems? Yes. Can we design strategies to deal with the problems? Absolutely. So it's a work in progress, but in the end, you want GBM patients to survive a minimum of 5 years, not of 2 people surviving after 5 years. You want at least half of the patients to be alive at 5 years. And that's not what we're seeing today. And I can go through the list of every major cancer: breast cancer, colon cancer, bladder cancer, liver cancer. They all have the same problem. They need glucose and glutamine. We found that. We know that. We know that. So it's a singular strategy, tweaked a little bit different for each type of cancer, but it's basically the same strategy. This is not what the industry wants to hear, believe me.
So when we go to cut off the glucose supply, which is feeding the cancer cell and allowing them to ferment and make more energy, you mentioned their water fasting and the ketogenic diet. I'm curious, for somebody who does decide to take on one of those as the dietary piece to address that part of the cancer, is there a difference in the research showing one being better than the other? Obviously, the water fasting is more extreme. Is it more effective to go that extreme?
No. We use the glucose ketone index calculator, which we published here. That gives every patient with cancer can then know how they stand. So it's a meter. You can buy it on Amazon, a Keto Mojo glucose ketone index meter, a meter that measures blood sugar. You prick your finger like a diabetic would. You measure with a strip. You can measure your blood sugar. You put the strip in the meter, reads the sugar. Okay, squeeze your finger a little bit more, put the ketone strip, put that in the meter. It tells you what your ketones are. You push the button and you get a ratio of how much ketone to glucose is in the blood. And normally people would look at that right after their lunch or dinner or whatever, and you'd have a value of about 50 or 60. Okay, to manage cancer, you need a value of 2.0 or below. Okay, people say, oh man, I don't know if I can get that. They eat this and go, can I eat that? Can I eat this? I don't know. Why don't you check your GKI, your glucose ketone index, and see whether you can eat that? And they said, oh no, it went up to 20. Well, don't eat that. So it's not that hard. And then they'll come and say, oh man, it's really, really hard to get my blood sugars down and my ketones up. And I said, well, I said, you want to kill cancer cells? What's your plan here? It's not easy. I don't want people to think. I'll tell you, it's a hell of a lot easier sitting down in the oncology thing and getting infused with poison. You don't have to do anything. You just sit in a lounge chair and they just drain it into your bloodstream. Doing metabolic therapy requires a big effort on your part. The patient has to play a major role in the management of the disease. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So when the patient can get down into that low GKI value, then the patient becomes, now the next step is use specific drugs that work better against the glucose and glutamine together. So you got the diet on the one side, making you healthier, putting pressure on the tumor cells, but then you hit them with low doses of a variety of other, and some of that can be low dose chemo, by the way. And then you just start hammering these tumor cells out of existence. So, and degrade them slowly while you continue to be healthy. None of this hair loss, vomiting, and all this other stuff. The tumor cells cannot survive in these harsh metabolic environments. You're doing it by lowering your sugar, and then you take small doses of like repurposed drugs and things like we already listed some of these, and more of them are becoming recognized. So you don't need to spend a lot of money. Now, as I said, you don't need to suffer with a lot of toxicity. Is it easy? No. I know what I'd have to do, but do you think I'm going to be saying, oh, no, I can't eat donuts and rice and bread? Okay, well, that might be the part of your sacrifice. And what a lot of people do, they dovetail it in with prayer. Whatever religion they are, they pray, and that helps them avoid bread. And in other words, it gives them more motivation to participate in their own healing process. What we found is that the human body has incredible capacity to heal itself if given the opportunity. So when you give your body the opportunity to heal, it will heal. It's hard to heal when you're being irradiated and treated with drugs that are poisonous. It's hard for the body to rally against that. So I think we have to change this whole paradigm by the way cancer is treated, and we can get much better success than what we have currently today.
One point I want to highlight there, the fact that blood glucose is still going to be elevated to a point. Even if we're fasting, doing water fasting over a longer period of time, we're still going to maintain a relative level of blood glucose, which for me triggers in my mind, it's not like you're having rice or a donut and spiking that blood glucose, but you still have that baseline level no matter what you're doing. How is that not enough to facilitate fuel for the cancer cells?
Yeah. So it becomes it's a population dynamics issue. Okay, when you have a high enough level of blood sugar from eating um, carbohydrates or whatever, the brain is satiated. Most of the other cells in your body are satiated. You already have a massive amount of excess glucose because you're eating foods that produce glucose. So if you stop eating from foods that produce glucose, your body now has to replace the glucose with something else, and they mobilize fats, and the fats go to the liver, and the liver produces ketone bodies. But the liver will also produce glucose through the process of gluconeogenesis. But gluconeogenesis cannot make up the need for how much glucose your brain needs. So there's going to be a shortage. So what's going to happen then is your brain is going to take what little glucose is available to do its and then replace the rest of it with ketone bodies. So this deprives the other cells in your body of glucose, and other cells in the body now also increase their demand for this glucose, because glucose is a good fuel for a lot of things. So now the tumor cells, which absolutely must have that fuel, are now competing with all other cells that also want the same fuel, but they wouldn't have competed with the tumor cells when the glucose was so high. So the tumor cells were free to do what they want to do. You lower the blood sugar, now these cells are in direct competition with other cells in the body, and eventually they start to lose the fight. They need the glucose. These other guys can burn ketones and glucose. These guys can't burn the ketones. They can't burn fatty acids. So they're linked to two fuels. One of them is glucose, and the other is this glutamine, which is an amino acid, which is the most abundant amino acid in the body. No diet can target the availability of the glutamine. That's why you have to come in with a little bit of a drug that will push that glutamine down, thereby starving these tumor cells of the two key fuels that they need. So you need to know how to play the normal cells off the tumor cells. You need to know how to reconstruct the energy bioenergetic system in the body so that the tumor cells are now in a fight for their life, for their struggle, where the rest of the body can transition off to another fuel. This is the strategy that we can use. So the other thing you have to realize that no one denies is that all the tumor cells have thousands of mutations. Everybody knows that. They have mutations because their energy is inefficient. They perform these reactive oxygen species, causing mutations in the DNA. So when you have all these tumor cells full of genetic mutations, and now you're taking the whole body and putting it into an energetic restricted state, normal cells evolved over millions of years to adapt to these restricted states. They make great efficiency at a small availability of molecules that can be respired in the environment. The tumor cell has all these mutations. It traps them. It prevents them from making rapid adaptations because the mutations block they have no metabolic flexibility. So that then puts them at a massive competitive disadvantage when they're up against the normal cells that have this metabolic flexibility. So you put all that together, lack of metabolic flexibility, restriction of the two fuels that are absolutely essential for their existence, and you target this while you're transitioning over, and these tumor cells are gradually eliminated and degraded slowly, and the material used from these dead tumor cells is now recycled into the normal cells of the body. The body will turn and eat the tumor cells as part of the fuel when you have under these. It's unbelievable. It's when you understand the bioenergetics of your body and what it's capable of doing, you know how these tumor cells can be blasted very effectively by just using a few strategies that is based on evolutionary biology and understanding of the biology of the tumor.
You talked about the genetic mutations within the tumor, and for anybody that might be confused, because early on in our conversation, we said that that's the current paradigm that doctors go by, the genetic mutations. Well, we're saying, we're not denying there are genetic mutations. It's the fact that we're going more upstream and saying that those are just a factor that happens later on, not the actual cause at the very top.
Yeah, they're completely correct. They collect, and the more the tumor is aggressive, the more mutations they collect. But those mutations also block metabolic adaptation. So as soon as you start restricting the two fuels absolutely essential for the growth of the tumor, the viability of the tumor, those tumor cells lack the ability to get energy from oxygen. That's the key. The tumor cell cannot get energy from oxygen. It can only get energy from what we call substrate level phosphorylation. It's a form of energy that doesn't require oxygen. Okay, so it's an ancient pathway. All the cells that existed on the planet before oxygen came into the atmosphere used this same energy mechanism, energy without oxygen. This is very interesting because tumor cells, as I said, what Otto Warburg did years ago with animals that had tumors, he would give the animal cyanide, which kills the animal immediately. But the tumor cells aren't killed. The tumor cells can grow in cyanide. They can grow without oxygen. So that clearly tells you wow, you mean to tell me a tumor cell can grow in cyanide? I said, yeah, we've done it. So cyanide kills people instantly, but the tumor cell is not killed by the cyanide. Why is that? Because it's not using oxygen. It's using ancient pathways to get energy. What are those pathways? Well, it's a fermentation mechanism. Wow. What are glycolysis in the cytoplasm, glutaminolysis in the mitochondria. So we know exactly what pathways these tumor cells are using. And I said, well, how do you know that? Because we targeted those pathways, kills the tumors right away. It's not that complicated. People, oh, wow, because the field is saying, okay, you got 10,000 mutations in there. Our precision medicine is going to target one of those mutations or a couple of them. That's not going to work. Each tumor cell has different constellation of mutations. So it's definitely not going to work. And it doesn't work for the majority of people. As a matter of fact, some of those targeted mutations turn on the body and blow out your liver, blow out your kidneys. They can kill you faster than the tumor can kill you. If you have the same epitope on a normal cell that you thought was only on the tumor cell, so when you give them this immunotherapy, it not only will hit a few of those tumor cells with that marker, but it also starts knocking out your liver and kidney that have that same marker. So what we see is called hyper-progressive disease. It's something you see when you see on TV at night all the commercials for all these cancer things, and on the bottom, it'll kill you in 15 different ways. They make that real small, that part real small. That should be the number one part. This drug will kill you in 15 different ways, but you might be one of the few ones that are lucky to survive.
It's a crazy world.
It's a crazy world, man, but you got to live with it,
Coming back to the dietary piece. So your research shows we either want to adopt a ketogenic diet or go to water fasting when it comes to fighting cancer. And we know what that's doing so far. We talked about it cuts off the fuel supply of the glucose to the cancer. My question is, when we get into that state of ketosis through either of those means, are the ketones themselves part of the therapy? Are they attacking or causing an environment that the cancer doesn't like?
Yeah, that's a good point. We tried that. The cancer cells can grow in the present so as long as we have glucose and glutamine there, you can put ketones in there. Okay, you have to get to really, really high levels, like 10 millimolar, before the ketones might act as a toxic. And the human body, it's hard to get up to 10 millimolar. So most people are in 2 to 4, maybe if they're lucky, 1 to 3, up to 5 millimolar, maybe a little higher. The primary role of the ketone bodies is to enhance the energetic efficiency of normal cells in the body. So that's their primary role. Also, by elevating ketones, it allows the body to push blood sugars down as low as you possibly can get, because you can even shoot up insulin into a person who is in therapeutic ketosis. Like for example, if you take a person and shoot them up with a high dose of insulin, they go unconscious. They have an epileptic seizure and possibly could die because you've removed all of the sugar in the blood immediately. So the brain has no energy and you go unconscious. If you take those same people and put them in therapeutic ketosis like Drenick did, this Dr. Drenick, and had their ketones elevated to about 4 millimolar, and then shot them up with a high dose of insulin, nothing. There was no effect at all. Why? Because the ketones were replacing the glucose as the fuel for the brain. So as long as you can transition, the brain can switch from glucose to ketone bodies. The tumor cell cannot switch from glucose to ketone bodies. Why? Because you need a good mitochondria. Mitochondria is the organelle that gets energy from oxygen. And that organelle is busted, inefficient and broken. Oxidative phosphorylation part of that organelle is broken. So they can't use ketones or fatty acids because you need a good healthy mitochondria to use those. So once you know the biology of the cancer cell and the biology of the normal cells, you just play one group of cells off the other in the correct metabolic environment, and the tumor cells lose every time.
When it comes to that experiment you talked about where somebody's in ketosis and they're able to use insulin to really bring that glucose down, was that just a thought experiment or has that actually been done? And
No,
if
it's done.
so, is that something that can be therapeutic to even cut off that fuel supply even more to the cancer cells?
It might be. I have the paper here, Drenick. Look it up. I couldn't believe it. He took all these really obese people, massively obese, and put them on a water-only fast for 21 days, brought their blood sugars down and their ketones up, and then shot them up with insulin, bringing the blood sugar down to 0.5 millimolar, 9 milligrams per deciliter. That's death for anybody that's not in ketosis. Those people are fine. They didn't even have any cognitive changes at all. So it was absolutely proven that you can do this. You can push blood, as long as you are in ketosis, you're protected against the effects of low hypoglycemia. You go to the hospitals and you say, oh, you got to get your cancer patients down to about 55 to 65 milligrams. Oh, no, that's going to kill them. You don't know about the keto. You don't know how to do this. I mean, you guys are medical professionals. You should know how to play these organs and these systems off each other to be successful in the treatment of the disease. So getting back to your question about can insulin potentiation therapy be one of the procedures that could use? I don't know. I know some of our colleagues in Istanbul use it. Some people have said they've gotten really good results as the result of that. But you got to make sure your patients are in therapeutic ketosis, nutritional ketosis, before you would want to mess around with that. Also, you've got to realize that this is not a long-term situation. They showed how long does the patient survive in this very, very low glucose condition using insulin and you're talking about several hours. You're not talking about several days. In order to kill the cancer cells, you really need to apply the pressure constantly over a significant period of time, where they're gradually degraded and gradually broken down and gradually managed. Insulin will kill a lot of cells maybe right off the bat, but it's not going to be. I don't think it might be used occasionally, a little bit of a pulse, but I'm not going to bank using it. And also, you got to be careful. If your patients aren't in ketosis, when you do that, you could run the risk of harm. There's a lot of things one has to be cognizant of before you would want to do that. But the answer to your question is, yeah, you can lower blood sugar down to almost zero with an insulin potentiation therapy while the patient is in ketosis, not when the patient is not in ketosis. You would never, ever do something like that.
The other potential challenge I can see with using that insulin with a cancer patient is the fact that we know that's a growth hormone. And I'm curious how, that might be able to affect the growth of cancer.
Well, as I said, you can't grow without energy. Energy is the key. You have two things. You have metabolites for growth, but you also have the energy. You can have all the metabolites in the world, but you don't have the energy to use them. You're going to die. So everything comes back to energy. So you have to have two things to grow cancer cells. You have to have energy and you have to have metabolites. So you have the metabolites and the energy, and you'll be able to grow these cells. So both the glucose and the glutamine not only provide the energy together, they also provide the metabolites. The nitrogen from glutamine is necessary for DNA and RNA synthesis and the synthesis of all amino acids. The carbons from glucose are absolutely essential for running the pentose phosphate pathway and providing the raw material for the synthesis of proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. So you put all the carbons from those two fuels are absolutely essential for the growth of those tumor cells. They can't use anything else in any sufficient capability. And in order to grow an inefficient beast, a growing tumor cell, which is highly energetically inefficient, you have to have logistics. The supply of the fuels used for their fermentation mechanism have to be present in the environment in sufficient quantities to drive the beast, because you need a lot of fuel that is inefficient. Okay, so if that's the key, you have two fuels that are necessary, that are abundant in the microenvironment, and the cancer cell will be able to grow and be resistant to almost everything you throw at it. But if you take away those two fuels and clean up the environment, these cells now become extremely vulnerable for killing and management without toxicity.
Coming back to my question earlier about the ketones and if they have a therapeutic role in this, it gets me thinking about exogenous ketones. And I know you mentioned there it would have to be this really high level of ketones in the body before they would be toxic to cancer. I'm curious, has there been any research or testing done of using this exogenous ketones
Yeah,
as a way
yeah.
of, an adjunct to therapy?
Yeah, Dom D'Agostino, my friend from University of South Florida, is developing these ketone supplements that you could possibly use. And what we're finding is that if you do get yourself into a state of therapeutic ketosis, where your ketone levels are about 3 to 4 millimolar, and your blood sugar level is maybe 50 or 60 milligrams per deciliter, when you take the ketone supplements, your blood sugar can be pushed to even a lower degree, and your ketones can be even elevated to a higher level. Again, putting more pressure on the tumor cells. But we haven't worked yet that into a therapeutic strategy. It's based on dosage, timing, and scheduling. And in order to fully take advantage of exogenous ketones, we need to follow more patients and measure their blood sugar and ketones while we are monitoring their tumor non-invasively, either by PET analysis or by MRI or CAT scan or some of these non-invasive ways, monitoring if there's a linkage between visible shrinkage of the tumor linked to levels of blood sugar and ketones in the patient. So we can then get more quantitative information with respect to that. And that, as far as I know, hasn't been done yet. Right now we're just in the process of how long can we keep a patient alive with a high quality of life, based on our concepts. But it's going to take more clinical and preclinical research to get the exact answer to your question.
So we've talked about the dietary piece quite a bit now through the glucose half of the equation. When it comes to glutamine, let's talk about the different drug options there and the physiology of how that stops that fuel from being used by the cancer.
Yeah, well, there's several ways. Glutamine is the most abundant amino acid in the body, higher than any other amino acid in the bloodstream. It's they call it a non-essential amino acid because you can synthesize it from glucose. It's essential for neurotransmission in the brain, the glutamine glutamate cycle. So it's a very crucial metabolite, amino acid in the brain for keeping our neurons firing in a correct way. It's an absolutely essential metabolite for cells of our immune system, like macrophages, T cells, and B cells. The cells of our immune system require a lot of glutamine. And of course, in our gut, the health of our guts, crypt cells, and all these kinds of cells in our intestines, they're also big users of the glutamine. So when you say, okay, we're going to try to target cancer cells also, the metastatic cancer cell is a big consumer of glutamine, because the metastatic cell, as we and others have shown, is actually derived from an immune cell in our body called the macrophage. It's a fusion hybridization kind of a thing. So they spread through the body, but they also sit next to immune cells. They suppress immune cells, but they're also consuming glutamine. So how do we go after the glutamine in the cancer cell without harming the normal cells that also need the glutamine? So this is why we use the pulse strategy. Okay, so we press the whole body of glucose, raising ketones, lowering glucose, as a constant press on the cancer cells. So they become less aggressive, more indolent, less inflamed. And then we take low doses of glutamine inhibitors that can inhibit any part of the glutaminolysis pathway, coming from the bringing into glutamine metabolizing it to glutamate, metabolizing it to alpha-ketoglutarate, to succinyl-CoA, to succinate. There's a pathway. And this is the pathway by which the cancer cells use to get their energy. So we can hit that pathway at any one of these steps, but we have to do it in a very strategic way as to not harm normal cells that need that same pathway. So that's why we pulse small doses of this as we got the cancer cells in a metabolic chokehold, but we're not ready to kill them yet. But we got to hit them with a little pulse and eventually they'll expire. But you got to do it in such a way as to not harm. This is why you need a fundamental understanding of biology. You need to understand the biology of all the key players that are participatory in the eventual management of the disease. So you can't go in there like a bull in a china shop and just, pour chemicals and poisons and radiation and all this kind of crazy shit. You can get rid of some cancer like that for sure. But you really can do it in a hell of a lot easier way, more strategic and less toxic, if you understand how to play these pathways off of each other in the different kinds of cells that are in the tumor microenvironment. And eventually you degrade the tumors down to a point where they become assimilated and used for fuel by the rest of the cells. So you're absolutely right. You can't throw a whole bunch of glutamine targeting drugs. Sure, you're going to kill some cancer cells, but then you're going to paralyze your immune system, because once you kill a bunch of cancer cells, who's going to come in and pick up the dead bodies of the cancer cells? You got a whole bunch of dead corpses of cells where that tumor used to be. And if you don't get rid of them, bacteria can get in there, cause some infection. You got another problem on your hands. So you got to be able to do this in a logical, strategic way to get rid of the tumor cells. I mean, all of this becomes extremely comprehensible when you understand the biology of the key players that are participatory in the growth of this malignancy. So again, it's just that we've been doing this for a long time. We study the biology of all the different participants in the microenvironment. We study who's doing what in these cancer cells, why they're spreading, how can they not, how do we kill them? And we're seeing success in people and in dogs. We're starting to see success in our strategy, and it's just a matter of polishing it up and perfecting it to get a real strategic way of dealing with this problem.
So when it comes to order of treatment, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's to get into a ketogenic state before you start pulsing the dawn.
Mm. Yes, because we showed in our publications that we could get 3 times more glutamine targeting drug through the blood-brain barrier onto target when the drug would be administered under therapeutic ketosis. So if you try to administer the drug in a high carbohydrate diet, American standard diet or whatever, you only get a little bit of drug on target. Therefore, you have to use a lot more of the drug. And when you use a lot more of the drug, you risk the toxicity issues that can come with the use of any drug given in excessive amounts. So what you want to do is you want to make that drug super powerful in lowest doses possible. And that is what the therapeutic ketosis does. It allows small molecules to come right on target, low dose, massively more powerful than they would have been if they were not used. This is another thing. You got to understand the biology of the problem to make your success much greater than it would have been. Again, what I'm talking to you about, almost nobody in the field knows anything that I'm saying here. And how do I know that? Because they're not using these techniques in their clinics. If they understood what I'm saying, they would be transitioning over to this immediately. But they're not. Why? Oh, I never heard of this before. Oh, I didn't know about it. You go ask them. Oh, I didn't know. No, there's no evidence to support. Did you read the paper? No, I didn't read the paper. Then how do you know there's no evidence to support that? You can go right down the list. And you have to give these guys a break too. These oncologists, they were never trained to look at cancer this way. They're memorizing all kinds of stuff, knowing how to use chemicals and radiation so you don't kill your poor patient. They're not looking at the biological strategies for knowing how to kill cancer cells without toxicity. They were never trained in the medical schools to know how to use diets and drugs, combos of diets and drugs to manage these things. So it's a lack of knowledge, lack of training, no motivation. I mean, you put it all together and you don't get what I'm telling you. You don't get that applied in the clinic.
One of the big things that jumps out to me too, as you talk about doctors, is the fact that even if, say, they tune into an interview like this and become aware or read your book, they have the legal ramifications if they try something alternative like this. So the way I understand it, at least, and I'm no lawyer, is that they're sort of handcuffed in a way to follow a certain protocol, or the college is going to crack down on them. So that's another
Yeah.
whole layer to this.
That's another whole layer. That's what I'm talking about. No flexibility in the standard of care. The standard of care was never written in granite. It's only supposed to be used because based on best medical practices and outcome, it should be used until something better comes along. Something better is here, but why now can you not use it? Then you have to say, oh, there's something other than patient outcome that must be underlying the lack of ability to use this new approach to managing cancer. So that becomes a different level of investigation. Why they don't want to do this? What are the real reasons for not wanting to do this? And I told you at the beginning, there's a number of reasons why people can't do that. The hospital administrators, you have to look at bottom lines and budgets and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you're going to bring in a treatment protocol that's not going to generate the revenue that you got from something else, then we got to reevaluate whether we want to do that or not. People say, wow, are you sure about that? Go ahead. Go find out why you can't use metabolic therapy as a standalone next to, oh, no, can't do that. Why? It doesn't go through the institutional review board. We have a group of physicians on institutional review boards that have to make the decision. They'll allow metabolic therapy under certain cases as long as it's done concurrently with the standard of care. The standard of care is your problem. So you got to get rid of the standard. It's not working. The standard of care for brain cancer, at least for glioblastoma, is not working. It's not working for advanced lung cancer. It's not working for advanced breast cancer. It's not working for a systemic metastatic cancer. The standards of care are not working, and that's what's killing the majority, allowing these poor people to be dead. So when are we going to shift this standard of care away from these toxic strategies, not based on the underlying biology of the disease? That's a question people have to ask themselves, right?
Well, this, like you said, ties back to what we were talking about earlier, the fact that therapies like you're talking about not only have to overcome the cancer, but also the conventional treatment that has to be stacked on top of it. So we're coming full circle here.
Yes, you're coming full circle. And the biggest thing they always say is ketogenic diet safe. Is metabolic therapy safe? They're always worrying about the safety issue. Are you kidding me? You're telling me that a calorie-restricted ketogenic diet is more harmful to the body than high-dose radiation and chemo? They should be asking whether radiation and chemo is safe, not whether a metabolic diet is safe. I mean, it's completely upside down, right? I mean, it makes no sense. Is ketogenic diet? We have thousands of little kids using ketogenic diet therapy for managing seizures, right? Thousands of kids all over the world using it to manage epileptic seizures. And now we try it on a cancer. Oh, no, we got to be careful. It might not be safe for the cancer patient because they relative to what? Radiation and chemo? I mean, the absurdity of some of these things is just beyond my comprehension.
Well, speaking of safety, that gets me thinking about diet, where we've talked about to this point where we're cutting things out, we're getting into ketosis, and then we're adding this drug in, which again triggers in my mind, how do we make this even less invasive and potentially safer? And that's instead of using the DAWN to have a food or a substance extracted from food that could do the same thing. So anything in that realm that you've discovered or anything promising where you could see a food or an extract from food taking the place of the drug?
Yeah, well, for glutamine, not yet. Now, we have a paper under review with a dog that has a malignant mast cell tumor on his face. And in some of my lectures, I've shown pictures of that dog. That was kind of a surprising case because the owner, what they call pet parent, brought the dog into the vet clinic, and they discovered under its lip it had a mast cell tumor. They did a biopsy on it, and it was a mast cell tumor. So if you look in the literature on mast cell tumors in dogs, that when they do genomic screens, they find all kinds of mutations in the cells in mast cell tumor. So it's like just about all the other kinds of tumors. You see all kinds of mutations. So They wanted to give the recommendation was chemo and radiation. Like, these are the standard things that they would do. The pet parents said no. They didn't want to do any of that because the outcome would not always be guaranteed, and their pet would be injured. It would be very sick. They said this dog would be very sick, and your outcome may not be a cure. So she said, "Well, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to figure out on my own." So she went back. The owner, in fact, all this is written in the paper that hopefully it's under review right now, but some of the reviews are pretty good. So I anticipate that it'll be out at some point. She switched the dog to a raw vegetable diet. Okay. So for a year, a little over a year, and the tumor grew much bigger, okay, on this raw vegetable diet. So clearly the raw vegetable diet was not working. And the tumor became very noticeable and large and started to invade local area, meaning that it is malignant. In fact, it was malignant by invading local tissue when it was first diagnosed as a smaller growth, and then the raw vegetable diet made it much bigger. Then she read our work and recognized that the dog is a descendant of the wolf. All dogs are derived from the wolf. What does the wolf eat? The wolf eats raw meat. The wolf can eat anything but vegetables. So they took all the vegetables away from the dog and gave the dog raw chicken, fish oil, a raw egg, and some coconut oil, small amounts, teaspoon, tablespoon levels. And the dog was calorie restricted and lost only about 8 or 10% of its body weight. And within 3 months, this big ass tumor was like gone, which was remarkable. And we used no drugs. There was no extra drugs used. It was purely diet alone that did this. And people are asking, well, if you're talking about the glutamine, how is it possible that this big tumor could be resolved in a relatively short period of time without additional drugs? And the answer is, we don't really know. All we know is that the tumor was growing rapidly and big, and the rapid change in diet caused it to resolve completely. And the dog, which was a pit bull, died at 15 years of age from heart failure. And the tumor never returned. The tumor was eliminated in 2015, and the dog lived to 2019. So clearly, it was cured of its cancer. The question is, how do you explain radical remission of this tumor without using the drugs that we think would be more successful? And the answer is we're not really 100% sure, but it comes back to the fact that those mast cell tumors cells are loaded with mutations, which, as I said, block metabolic adaptation. So the tumor cells with their mutations could not redirect their metabolism when the body was asked to be under a more restrictive metabolic state. Those cells were unable to adjust. And that's where these collection of mutations in the tumor cells could be our ally when we start to put the whole body under a restrictive state. Dogs have an incredibly capable adaptation to physiological stress. And if you have a cell loaded with mutations, that cell will not have those capacities and will be eliminated for fuel for the rest of the body. So this is what we call autolytic cannibalism. Can it happen in people? Probably for some kinds of tumors. Will it happen for a glioblastoma? I don't think so. But maybe it could. We don't know. But if it were me and I were the one to have colon cancer, bladder cancer, or whatever, I would certainly use some of the very non-toxic drugs that I know would push the diet to make it a little bit more powerful. I'm not going to risk my life knowing that I have drugs available that I can use that are not so toxic and that could push these cancer cells out of existence a little faster. Is it possible that I could go on a 30-day water-only fast, which people do, and eliminate the cancer? Yes, it's possible. I have evidence from clinicians who have emailed me and told me that their cancers were completely dissolved after 25 days of several water-only fasts like this. Well, this is really tough. I think most people would probably figure out, can I get that done a little bit easier? Do you have a drug that might be able to push it a little bit faster? And the answer is yes. If people want to try a 21-day water-only fast 3 times a year to get rid of their cancer, I'm not going to stop them. I've seen it work, but it's not. But if you told a cancer patient that, they think you were crazy. Even oncologists think you're crazy to recommend something like that. But it works. But I wouldn't say it's something that everybody is going to jump on, especially if they have an opportunity to lessen the stress. People don't. You feel, oh Jesus, but you can do all these things. Yeah, they work. I mean, probably work on some people. Worked on Guy Tannenbaum. He's on the web. He did all these water only fasts. He got rid of his advanced prostate cancer. So I'm not saying that's going to work for everybody, but I would certainly want to integrate diet with drugs where I know I have some handle on the whole thing. And that would, to me, would be a more logical way to go about it.
That's exactly where I was going. I'm glad you covered that, though, to compare water fasting versus the treatment protocol we've been talking about.
Yeah. I mean, sure, they can work. I'm not going to, because I have hard evidence that it does work, but it's not something a lot of people are going to jump on right away.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
What I'm talking to you about, almost nobody in the field knows anything that I'm saying here. And how do I know that? Because they're not using these techniques in their clinics. If they understood what I'm saying, they would be transitioning over to this immediately.